Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us in a special edition of Arkansas Week, special for more reasons than one. Obviously, this broadcast is being brought to you through the technological wizardry of the Arkansas PBS production staff. We're social distancing, if not editorially so. There are many reasons for a program of this sort. Public health, of course, is an enormous issue. So is the public economy, but so is public education, to include higher education. And there are so very many questions to ask and be answered in a time that Arkansas has rarely seen the likes of before. So with that, we are joined for this hour edition of Arkansas Week by Arkansas Education Secretary Johnny Key, and by Stacy Smith, who is the Assistant Commissioner of the Department of Education for Elementary and Secondary. And Dr. Maria Markham is Director of the Division of Higher Education for Arkansas. And we thank all three of our guests for being with us. Secretary Key, let me begin with you. We have, I think, including public and private schools, something just a bit south of 500,000 elementary and secondary students in Arkansas. Now, recognizing that you're primarily responsible for, I think, about the 470,000 or so that are in public K-12. Where does the situation stand now? There's not going to be school as we know it for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. It was a tough call, but it was a necessary call. When consulting with Dr. Smith, Secretary of Health, and with the governor, and looking at the projections and the models for the COVID-19 outbreak that we have in Arkansas, we originally had closed school to on-site instruction through April 17th with the hope that we could start back on April 20th. But as the numbers kept coming in, as the projections, although they are looking better, they are still at a state where we felt like, for the interest of public health, it was the right call to close school for on-site instruction for the rest of the school year. Now, that doesn't mean school is closed. That means we have shifted. And I would just have to say the remarkable response from our educators around the state, from our administrators, to shift from a traditional classroom delivery to a very non-traditional, either technology-based or through printed packets, AMI packets. Arkansas was definitely better prepared than a lot of states because we have, for several years now, had AMI, alternative methods of instruction, on the books in state law that are usually reserved for short-term conditions, weather situations, or shorter outbreaks of illness on a more localized basis. But because of that experience, we've been able to shift. So now the 470,000 students in Arkansas can, in some way, continue educational opportunity for this school year.
How, Mr. Secretary, have you said the response thus far has been gratifying, or indicated that it's been gratifying. How do you measure that?
Well, just the level of response, and in our conversations with superintendents and educators, I mean, it's not perfect. It's messy. I mean, I said that when we first rolled this out, that it would be messy because it's so outside the norm. And when you have something of this, a disruption of this magnitude, you can't expect it to be perfect. But the feedback that we have received, by and large, has been, hey, look, we're making this happen. The teachers are teaming together. They're working locally and with other teachers in their region to create opportunities for lessons. We've seen an increase in digital platforms for those areas that is, they have the capacity for that. So, it's gratifying in the sense that Arkansas did not have to shut down school like some states did. Some states have just said, look, we can't continue delivering education in any way. We know that it will have its challenges, but what's gratifying is that our teachers have said, look, we're going to roll up our sleeves and make this work.
Stacy Smith, with direct hands-on K-12, is the state at this point equipped to continue this through what would have been the end of the traditional semester? Or are we going to have additional resources brought in?
So, it depends on where you are in the state, the resources that they have. But we've had tremendous response from our superintendents who said, we have the capacity to do this. And that really greatly influenced the decision that was made about continuing school. Local school districts feel like they have the capacity. Now, as far as resources, the state has been providing resources directly to schools through our PBS partnership. We've also provided online resources for school districts, but each school district is unique, and they have to determine what is the capacity of their community, of their students, of their faculty, and they have to make decisions based in their local community and what their folks need.
It might do, Stacy Smith, to take just a moment and explain to parents, what are we talking about in terms of capacity and in terms of resources?
So, first, the districts, you have a lot of districts in the state who decided to go towards a digital platform. So a community has to determine, one, do they have access? Do they have devices? Do students have the ability, and parents and families have internet access at their homes? You've seen local school districts set up Wi-Fi parking lots. You've seen churches get involved. You've seen school districts actually have pass out Chromebook Day, where parents are driving through and schools are handing out devices. You have some school districts where they don't have one-to-one devices, and so that's not an option for them. And they then have to look at what is the capacity that we have to deliver instructions. And you see those districts using paper packets. You see those districts using phone calls, FaceTime. It's different from district to district, and each district has to look at and determine what can their students and families kind of handle during this time. Our goal with AMI is that students are maintaining and that school districts are focusing on the essential standards or essential skills that their students need to have. School looks different.
But obviously, Secretary Key and Ms. Smith, it is not your primary responsibility by any stretch, or wasn't anyway. We're talking about information tech and the expansion of broadband, particularly into rural Arkansas. This crisis, if you want to call it a crisis, would appear to underscore the necessity of getting a wireless and broadband services into those portions of the state in which it's still lagging.
No, you're absolutely, yeah. So you're right, Steve. And back just in December of 19, the committee, one of the legislative committees, issued a report on the status of broadband in the state of Arkansas, and it definitely continues to be a gap in certain parts of the state. There are just a patchwork of providers out there, and so there is not the infrastructure just isn't there at the moment. But I know that the governor's broadband task force is working on what the plan is. But now we see in a situation like this, not just from an education standpoint, but from rural healthcare, telemedicine, and some of those things that we have heard talked about in the last few weeks with respect to the COVID-19 health crisis. It does underscore the need. It's something that I know our legislative delegation, our congressional delegation is aware of. So they are helping where they can at the federal level. I will say that we are better than we were 5 years ago. And the reason I say that is because up until 5 years ago, not even all of our districts had the capacity that they now have. Just bringing broadband into the school and onto the campus. The fact that we now have those resources, at least to the campus level, has helped our schools be better prepared now to face something like this. And as Stacy mentioned, having your Wi-Fi turned on so that folks can access it in the parking lots is something that just a couple of years ago would not have even been an option. We're better than we were. We're not as good as we need to be, so we need to keep working on it.
Let me go to Maria Markham now on the higher ed side, if I can. Or Stacy Smith, did you want to add something to that before I go to Maria Markham?
I just want to make a comment that, schools are encouraged to do asynchronous learning as well as synchronous. And what I mean by that is it's pre-recorded, and where students can drive into the parking lot and upload on their device and go home and work offline. And so that option is available for a lot of our communities where broadband is not as accessible.
Maria Markham, we have a state cover peppered with 2- and 4-year campuses that resemble ghost cities now. And on top of that, we have an economy that is very much in question, casting additional doubt on the fiscal stability of higher ed in Arkansas. Can you give us an opening kind of assessment?
We anticipate a mixed year of a lot of challenges and opportunities in higher education. We're nervous about what revenues will do because those are always tied so closely to the funding of higher education institutions. So if this pandemic persists for much longer, then we will see negative impacts on state funding for higher ed. The flip side of that, we have to look at enrollment and what is this going to do to our student populations. Most states that are being impacted are projecting enrollment declines in the fall based on what we've seen here. Much of that will depend on how quickly we bounce back. We know that in times of higher unemployment that our 2-year colleges actually see an increase in enrollment. Students coming back who are displaced and need to upskill to be able to move into positions that will allow them to be employed in the knowledge economy. So there's a possibility of positive enrollment growth at our 2-year colleges, but it does depend. It depends on how long this persists, just how far revenues dip in the state. And unfortunately, when revenues fall and higher education institutions fall in their state funding, we see tuitions increase. So the cost for students could be absorbing some of those losses that we see as a state. So we have a lot of challenges, but there are some possible opportunities for institutions to be able to reach these students who have been displaced through unemployment.
Let's go to some questions that have been submitted by viewers. And here's one, Secretary Key, really at the top of the list. How are we going to, you acknowledged, I think in a press conference earlier this week with us in the governor's office, this is going to be, in a sense, an incomplete semester. Nobody's kidding anybody. You cannot off-site compensate for what youngsters K-12 or even higher would have had the opportunity to absorb had on-site education continued. How much are these students going to miss?
Yeah. Well, and that's going to vary greatly from district to district. What we are encouraging schools to focus on right now, because you cannot replicate the classroom experience with that teacher in that classroom helping those students, is to reinforce some of those skills, drive for mastery and some of those skills that had already been covered up until the time that we closed school for on-site instruction. So, some students may, who have already mastered that, they may think, well, this is review of things we've already covered. Other students are going to benefit and be better prepared with some of those essential skills if they gain mastery of those. So, but now that we have the certainty of saying we'll continue the school year with AMI delivery, now we can start planning for how we transition into next school year. There are still many unknowns right now.
I'm sorry.
We just need to start thinking about how do we recover not the lost time, but we need to recover the lost learning, and identifying what those elements are that we need to focus on as we move into the next school year.
Any thought whatsoever, Secretary Key or Ms. Smith, in regard to beginning, let's assume for a second that the pandemic subsides or prayerfully even is conquered. Any thought given at all to starting the fall semester early?
I think all the options need to be on the table, Steve. I think that's a conversation that we'll need to have with schools. There are a lot of legal elements, things that are in statute that control when the school year can start. There are contractual issues that with teachers and staff that have to be considered as well. I think probably all of our districts right now have already set their calendars for the next school year, which becomes part of their personnel policy. And if we make any changes there, we're going to have to look to see how we can be consistent across the state. If we start the school year early, what does that mean for students? Will they be required under compulsory attendance to come early? I mean, those are all the types of questions that we have to and have started analyzing to try to come up with something that makes sense.
Yeah, Stacy Smith, it sounds from Secretary Key there, it sounds like it's just put it mildly, a thorny issue of starting the fall semester early.
You know, again, we've had some districts or some superintendents say, you know, this is time to relook at our calendars. We've heard others say we've got to look at summer programs. We've heard others say we need to focus on our students who we know kind of fell through the cracks during this time. So again, you're going to see this done a little bit differently in each community, but the number of days and time does not necessarily equal the amount of time someone needs for learning. You have some schools, and not schools, but you have some students who always require more than the traditional year, and they need intensive intervention or services beyond the regular school year. And you have some students who they're accelerated and they're advanced and they're using the time to continue to move forward in their learning. So it's time for schools and parents and communities to start thinking about how do we address the needs of our learners? What is it we want our students to know and to be able to do, and focus on those skills? And the students who are not at that level, schools need to work to come up with an intervention plan about how they're going to fill those holes. And it can be done in many different ways. But you're going to see, I think, some summer programs or boost programs, schools who maybe start early and bring in students that need that extra boost so that they can be successful moving into another year. But, you know, for us we've lost about a quarter of the school year, the last 9 weeks. So what does that mean for our kids? Well, it means that for some kids, it's going to be devastating, and we're going to have a lot of work to roll our sleeves up and make sure and fill that, because we already see that we have a summer loss, and we've extended that summer loss by, 6 to 7 weeks. That's why it's so important in Arkansas that we are doing the AMI days, and that we are encouraging schools and parents and communities to continue to read, continue to write, continue to communicate with their students, continue to do problem solving and reasoning skills. It's important to be able to do those things and be able to maintain.
It sounds, Ms. Smith, as though that first fall semester, assuming everyone is back on campus, that's going to be a fairly muscular regimen that our K-12 students, or certainly in the higher grades, or maybe K-12 period, are going to be facing.
I think that it will be facing, but you know what? I think sometimes we underestimate our families, and we underestimate our students, and we underestimate our teachers. When we set the bar low and our expectations are low, then we've got a longer way to climb. I say that we continue to set the standards of what we expect our students to know and be able to do, and we figure out how to reach it. Is that hard work? Teaching is hard work every single day. And we've got teachers who are working around the clock right now, even during AMI, to make sure that their students are receiving some type of instruction. But I don't think we lower the bar. I think we keep it where it's at, and we figure out how we fill the hole or fill the void.
Okay, let me go to Maria Markham for this, and then back to Ms. Smith or Secretary Key. It is entirely plausible, even to a layman, that, for example, British Lit or English composition can be readily taught. I say readily can be taught far more easily online than, say, physics or biology or any of the lab disciplines. Is that what's going to be missing on this last 9 weeks?
Well, you're absolutely correct, Steve. We've been teaching online in higher ed for a long time, and we're actually really well versed in that in Arkansas. We've had robust distance learning program in our state for years. So there are certain subjects and certain faculty members who are well prepared to move their content online if it wasn't already there. They're much like Stacy mentioned, it's going to be uneven because there are other subjects that don't lend themselves well with hands-on learning or just the content of the course to be online. It can be done and it can be done well, but having faculty members who have that background, it's not going to be the same at every institution. What we're seeing now, institutions are using innovative measures to get this content to students. They're bringing students in small groups, 3 or 4 learners at a time into a lab. They're observing social distancing and really fastidious sanitation practices to get students into the biology lab, to get students into the welding lab, and make sure that their students are receiving the learning that they signed up to get. In college, we're terminal. You may not have another semester to master an outcome. So it's our responsibility to make sure that students receive what they paid for and they get to their outcomes in a timely manner. So you're absolutely correct. Some things are a natural progression of what we're already doing, and some things have moved us out of our comfort zone. And we're having to be very innovative in how we get students to that learning.
Yeah, Stacy Smith, same question to you at the high school level. Are we still, by the way, dissecting frogs in biology, or?
Well, yes, you still have that, but I'll tell you that my daughter in college did a biology lab one time, or anatomy lab, and she was doing some dissecting on my kitchen table. So I think that digital learning has changed. And one of the areas that we have to work on with our faculty and our staff right now is they're having to adjust and they're having to learn the platform so that they can deliver quality digital options. And this probably right now, if I had to say there was an area that we need to be working on with our educators in the state, and districts need to be giving their educators time to collaborate with one another about how are you doing this remote learning? How are you, how's this teacher reaching her students versus this teacher? What app are you using? What platform are you using? Because every day there's something else popping up there that we didn't know about. And so this establishing these true professional learning communities where teachers are learning from each other about how to meet the needs of their students through remote learning is essential.
Question for Secretary Key and then to Secretary Markham. Mr. Key, numerous questions, or this question from numerous students and parents, under the circumstances, is the high school degree I will be awarded hopefully this year as valuable as it should be? And Ms. Markham, is my BA or maybe my MA as valuable as it would have been under conventional circumstances? Secretary Key, we'll start with you.
I think to diminish the value in any way would be to diminish what these students have done over the body of work that they've done over multiple years. High school, the learning in high school is not just what you get in your senior year. It is a compilation and accumulation of all of those things that you have done, even starting in Arkansas, where you can start earning credits before 9th grade. So I do not diminish it in any way at all. This is it's a difficult time, and it's especially for our seniors because they are missing out on some of those rites of passage that our society holds so important, so dear, like graduation ceremonies and other types of things that come with the senior year. But no, it is still of the same value. We still are having expectations for the class of 2020 to be out there and use what they're learning and observing during this time in history to shape how they approach their own future.
Maria Markham.
Yeah, I agree with everything Commissioner Key mentioned, as well as, really this is a badge of honor for college students to complete during this time. They're going to be expected to demonstrate the same level of proficiency and knowledge during this time, with all of the added stress of dealing with this pandemic, with balancing a shift to the online learning environment, along with possible unemployment, with children home from school who are helping them every day. So not only will they receive the same credential that they would have received otherwise, and the same learning outcomes will be met, but they will have done it in a very stress-filled environment in a very unprecedented way.
Secretary Key, or perhaps Ms. Smith, this is a question from Willie, who emailed a question in on our P Affairs site. Those we used to be called student teachers who were in their internships, but have not, because of the situation, have not been able to complete their, one assumes, on-site internship. What is going to be their certification status?
That's a great question. And when we were discussing the issues with higher ed, I hope we would get to come back to that. We know that this interruption has created for our student interns just a really uncertain future for them. We have been working with all of the colleges of education at the institutions around the state to try to find ways to make sure they can complete, either through extended time when we maybe do come back, or as far as licensure, looking at provisional methods for providing them with the license, because we will consider that they have completed their program. I know some of the institutions have issues with their own commissions and their own governing bodies that they have to work through, but we are trying to provide as much flexibility as we can possibly provide when it comes to the licensure portion. So we are going to do our best to make sure none of those students that are in those internship programs hit a roadblock that keeps them from moving on into a classroom setting. We need them. We don't want them to give up and be frustrated. We want to get them licensed. We want to get them in a classroom.
Stacy Smith?
No, I agree with what Secretary Key said. And really it's working with higher ed and making sure that those folks are getting what they need. And then our licensing division providing the provisions necessary to get those folks in the classroom. When we do have new teacher candidates, first year starting, they do have mentoring programs. And there is a lot of support given to those folks.
A question from Alan via Facebook. And by the way, this is the same question that has come in from numerous parents, almost innumerable parents. Given the present dynamic in K-12, is there a reliable, accurate measure of how well my student has performed in these last couple of semesters? Secretary Key, or Ms. Smith, whoever.
To me, the most reliable source is the student's teacher. You know, we have, you know, state testing and we have all these other measures, but those are just one picture of the student on a week. But multiple measures that students take all year long on their grades, their work, their interaction in classrooms, those are the best indicators of how well a student is doing. So local school districts with local educators are the best source for that information.
Secretary Key, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, just to say that, you know, again, thinking of in terms, I think we can't be short-sighted and think only in terms of this time that we've missed, because students put in a lot of work up until that point. So, you know, their teachers assess on an ongoing basis. And the purpose of those assessments are to evaluate what students, what they've learned, have they mastered it, what extra help do they need? And really, that's the basis that we are asking our teachers now as we shift to AMI, go back to that student data and find out, dig a little deeper to find out what it was that our kids needed some more assistance in. The value of a letter grade for a student is not what we really need to focus on, although it's important. It's the value of what has been learned, because you know, we need to understand better now. If you are missing fractions, in this last part of the school year, the impact of that later, when you get into higher level math, is going to be critical. So it's less of gauging by letter grade than it is gauging by what do we know, what elements do we know that they need help with, get them that help, and make sure that they are prepared for when they move on. So I do understand the desire and the need for letter grades. When we get back to a better routine and some of those traditional measurements can be put back in place, I know it'll make us all feel better. But right now, it's identifying those supports and those essential standards that kids need to extra help with.
Dr. Markham, I have a feeling you anticipated this question, but many inquiries from university students. Am I entitled to any refund? Will that decision be made on a campus level or a system basis or at the state level?
Yeah, so all of those decisions are made on a campus level. So all of our higher ed institutions are self-governing. They're all in the process of making announcements about how they're going to handle refunds for housing, for meal plans, for things that students aren't going to be able to receive. Some of our institutions are better situated to issue cash refunds, others credit toward future semesters. We do anticipate some of our federal stimulus dollars being dedicated to reimbursing students for those lost investments in housing and food plans. So there won't be a state directive. Those are under the authority of the boards of trustees at each campus. We do anticipate that students will receive some type of credit, whether it be cash reimbursement or credit toward a future semester for things that they did not receive in the spring.
Here is an opportunity. We have sort of covered this before, but it is coming in from so many individuals. For example, Whitney, who phones this or communicates this question by Twitter. Thank you for your assurances, but how much, once again, how much is going to be lost? And I guess let's go first to Secretary Key, Ms. Smith, in terms of the shutdown of K-12 campuses. How to make that up? Is it realistic?
Well, and I think it's realistic to do it in terms of identifying. I mean, we have so many standards at each grade level that I think any teacher would tell you, you cannot get through all of those standards in the course of a year. Even after we revised our standards several years ago, away from the Common Core standards to the Arkansas State standards we have now, we know that those standards are not realistic for getting through completely in a year's time. That's why it's important that each school identify the essential standards, that we work on helping them identify the essential standards. So how much is going to be lost during this time depends really on what the schools have identified and those teacher groups have identified as the essential learning standards that a fourth grader needs to know before they go on to fifth grade. That's what we have to determine right now. And we can look at the standards in the book and we could see, okay, this is what you should have been covering in this last 9 weeks. But the reality is that some schools have moved beyond that, or maybe some schools haven't quite gotten there yet. So to give a general answer of how much has been missed really would mask the reality in a lot of those schools. But that's the work that we'll be doing to help bridge as we move into the next school year what those essential standards are. And Stacy, I know her team have been doing a lot of work on that already.
All right, Ms. Smith, you want to follow up on that?
So you're right, we have lost some time, but learning hasn't stopped for our students or our teachers as far as teaching. I mean, that's what this process of AMI is about. It's about continuing to provide some type of instruction for our students so that they are continuing to learn. So yes, we have lost some face-to-face time in our buildings in our schools, and we do have some students that schools are not reaching right now, and that's a huge concern. But for the majority of our students and our families and our teachers in the state, learning is continuing. What they're being pressed to do right now is to change how school looks like and what it felt like before spring break. You know, before they had so many periods a day or lessons a day, they had face-to-face contact each day. It's different now, and it looks and feels different. And again, it goes back to what Commissioner Key said. We've got to focus on what's essential right now. Families or in schools, they're struggling with trying to determine exactly what that looks like right now. The parent was never intended through AMI to replace the teacher, but a lot of them right now are finding themselves doing that. So schools have to adjust. What's being sent home has to be adjusted a little bit, but everyone is still continuing to learn. And again, I think that we're not going to lower the bar for our students. And I think when we return back to school in the fall, you're going to see some very innovative things occurring. You're going to see innovative things occurring this summer to fill those holes. And I think we're going to march on.
Steve, let me throw in there too, if I may.
Sure.
Dr. Markham mentioned the relief money from Congress, and that's, you know, we haven't talked about that yet for K-12, but that's an area that we feel like those funds will be available to help us develop plans moving forward, so that whatever learning students have missed, we can put something in place using those funds to make up for that lost learning. And you know, one great thing right now in Arkansas, we have not cut funding for education. Even with the budget reduction, the revenue reductions that have come as a result of this, our K-12 schools are fully funded. And so no teachers have been let go, no staff have been let go. They had to, you know, school officials have tried to find creative ways to make sure that the essential work at the school can continue. We've had a lot of conversations with superintendents about that, but as we shift the conversation to that lost learning, we believe that certainly, and under the governor's direction for education, we believe that prioritization needs to be given to using some of these funds for that lost learning.
Well, I have to say, Secretary Key, you say fully funded, but not to the level that has been recommended in some instances. So are we starting fully funded per the administration's recommendations, but does that put us a bit behind going in?
Yeah. Well, when I say fully funded, it's fully funded according to the adequacy recommendations that were passed by the General Assembly and adopted by the General Assembly, and those things were reflected in the governor's budget. So there has been no reduction in funding going to schools. When I say fully funded for this school year, this fiscal year, you know, they are not seeing any reductions in that. And we also just received a waiver from the federal government so that federal dollars, you know, have a time limit that some of the federal dollars can be spent. Well, some of those federal deadlines have now been extended. So you have current federal dollars that can be used typically to help struggling learners. Then you're going to have this new set of federal dollars coming in. Again, much of that will be to help struggling learners, to help fill those gaps. So I think from a financial standpoint, we are in better shape than some of my colleagues in other states have expressed because of revenue stabilization, we have been able to fund education first and have not reduced that.
From our P Affairs website, from Twitter, from other sources, Facebook, Dr. Maria Markham, what the college entrance process, will that be affected at all in terms of the criteria that individual institutions will be seeking?
We don't believe so. All of our admissions processes will remain the same. Students have been concerned about the ACT in April being moved to June, but that will still allow students to take the ACT if they have not. We also have several of our colleges who will be offering a residual ACT, and that's a campus-based ACT that's off schedule. Those students will be able to take the test there and receive the score the same day. That can also be used for admissions and all state scholarships. So we don't anticipate any complications with our admission process.
From Megan, an email at P Affairs, Secretary Key. Why not simply extend the school year?
Well, that certainly is something that could have been looked at. Again, you have contractual issues with teachers. Teachers are typically on a 190-day contract. So, you know, and the funding that's tied to that, when the districts and the teachers in those districts, they set those calendars ahead of time. And so the contractual obligations that are tied to that are things that can't just simply be waived or simply be extended by the state. So we had to be respectful and mindful of those contractual issues when looking at the calendars. Now, could we extend? Could we do summer school? Could we do something like that that would be not tied to those contracts? Sure. But we needed to get some certainty for this school year, for the 19-20 school year, so our districts, our families could start planning for how they were going to handle the rest of the school year. And that's why we felt like it was important for those districts to work out the rest of their calendar. And then we can regroup in the summer and going into the next school year to see because again, another reason not to extend the school year, Steve, we don't know how long the social distancing, the guidelines from the CDC and the health department are going to last. It's possible that we could not have gone back into our physical classrooms anytime before June or July. So too many unknowns also that weigh into that decision.
Dr. Smith, this particular question comes in from Loretta on our P Affairs email address, but it is of a piece with numerous other parents who have, and some grandparents who have written us. I am frankly overworked. I want to do everything, they say. I want to do everything I can to help my child or my grandchild succeed, but this is too much for me. I'm too old. Any tips? I am overworked. I have to work an 8-hour day, a 10-hour day, and then I have to help my youngster.
No, that is something that's guidance that we're giving to school districts right now. They need to think about what is going on in the homes right now. And you are right. We do have grandparents, we have parents, people are working full-time jobs. You have multiple kids in one home. So that is something that school districts have to think about. And again, AMI looks different. It doesn't mean it has to be 6 hours of instruction for their students sitting at the kitchen table with mom or grandma trying to do this work. So schools have to adjust as we move forward. What AMI looked like in week 1 of this will look different in week 3, and will look different in week 5, and should look different in week 8. I mean, districts should be monitoring what's going on in their communities. They should be providing some type of survey or soliciting feedback from their families to say, how's this working? What can we do to support you? So there needs to be some adjustment made. So yeah, I've heard the same thing. We've got people doing the best they can in the situation that they're in. And so we're hoping to give out some clear guidance to schools on how do they provide additional support or kind of minimize maybe what their expectations are. Because we have a lot of schools who are trying to do 6 hours of instruction, meeting with every teacher every day, hitting every subject. And we've given permission and granted to say, hey, you can pull back from that. You know, what are the things that are essential right now? What do we want to make sure that our kids learn this year, what they get it this year, so that they're successful moving into next year. And that's the part right now that our schools and our families need to work together to find that balance.
Emily, I believe, I gather from this particular email, is a teacher, but might well be a parent. Would you recommend, Dr. Smith, some apps that seem to work best? And I gather this is at the elementary level.
Yeah, so you've got lots of different ones out there, and you've seen lots of vendors coming in. You know, you see lots of folks using like Seesaw for the elementary. It's a platform. You see schools using their virtual providers, using a Canvas platform. As far as specific apps, I don't know that I'm an expert in that area. We do have a resource document on our website that actually has recommendations for online resources for parents to use with their students. But we'll be glad to be able to look at and find some additional resources if needed for our teachers.
Steve,
Maria.
I would just add to that, if I may, just to say that
Sure.
and express my thanks for the partnership that we have with Arkansas PBS to create the Arkansas AMI resources. The programming, Arkansas PBS has shifted their morning schedule to provide programming, and we are receiving very positive feedback from that. It seems to strike the right balance for the schools that are using those resources. It doesn't put a lot of added pressure on parents, grandparents, caregivers to be directly involved. We have links to a number of resources, apps, learning guides, things to watch. We've engaged our Arkansas Teachers of the Year to help intro and provide mini lessons and help our students to understand, here's what you're going to be learning, here's what you need to look for. So I think any district that is struggling with coming up with a very solid AMI plan, I think would do well to look at what Arkansas PBS and the Division of Elementary and Secondary Education is providing through the Arkansas AMI. And then for the secondary level, looking at the opportunities schools have to engage with Virtual Arkansas and the Arkansas Public School Resource Center, a number of online courses that are there for high school students that some districts are taking advantage of as well. So there are a number of resources out there, and looking at our website, you should be able to easily find those.
A Facebook question for Dr. Markham. Are universities, colleges and universities, Dr. Markham, going to go to a pass-fail system for this semester?
Yeah, some of them are. We've had a couple of universities who've announced that all courses will be pass-fail for the spring. We've had others that will be pass-fail for some courses, and then others who are giving students the option to either accept the letter grade or to elect a pass-fail. There are positive and negative aspects of the pass-fail. Sometimes we have difficulty transferring courses between institutions if a pass-fail is given. Other situations, students with pass-fails aren't able to use those courses for admissions purposes for graduate programs. So it's not practical or recommended for all types of courses or all students, but it is being given as an option when it is beneficial to students. So also we have at the division waived the continuing eligibility requirement for GPA for spring semester for all of our state scholarship and aid programs. So those pass-fail course grades will not negatively impact a student's ability to continue receiving their financial aid from the state of Arkansas.
Arkansas, in a sense, then, is in the same situation as other states in terms of the evaluation, anyway, grade evaluation.
Yes.
And a question from an email question from Crystal, Dr. Smith, or Secretary Key. We haven't mentioned yet in this broadcast the special needs of kids with or students with learning disabilities. Is this what can you add to that situation? Dr. Smith, we'll start with you. They need special attention.
Yeah, and school districts are encouraged to revisit the students' IEPs. Their expectation is that they are delivering instruction during this time to those students through whatever alternate methods they determine meets the students' needs. But school districts most certainly need to be relooking at their students' IEPs. They need to, above everything else, they need to make sure they're communicating with the parents. That's probably the thing that causes the most frustration is lack of communication or knowing what's happening or what services are being provided to my child. So districts have been encouraged to reach out, make contact with parents, let parents know, hey, this is how we're meeting your child's needs during this time. Does it work? Is it not? Is it working? Is it not working? What can we do differently? They will have to, after when we get to the end of the year or as we're leading up to the end of the year, they're going to have to evaluate do extended year services need to be provided to those students. And you're going to see cases in which some of those students will require some summer, learning opportunities.
Secretary Key, we geared up to do that at this time?
Yeah, well, we have to gear up. I mean, we don't have a choice. These students need these services, and we are legally obliged. The districts are obliged to provide those. So obviously, in a practical sense, there are some elements of those plans that can't be delivered right now. A student that needs physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, just for our overall health reasons now under this emergency, you can't have the close contact that you need to have with these specialists that go into the schools that provide these services. So what we're encouraging schools to do is to make sure they understand the times that are being missed, and at whatever point in time we go back to and we get some relief from these restrictions, they need to go in and they need to re-engage with those students and those families, start providing that therapy, whatever type of therapy it is that's identified in the IEP. This emergency that we're in now does not absolve anyone, the state, school districts, anyone of their obligation for these students. And we don't take that lightly. We're very serious about it, and we want to support our districts in making sure that they can provide and meet those needs when the health crisis subsides.
Stay with Secretary Key and then go to Director Markham. Secretary Key, a worst case scenario would appear to be, or a very bad scenario would appear to be, that if social distancing continues into what would be the autumn term beginning in August, is there any contingency planning underway should that be advisable?
Well, we're always planning for the contingencies. One of the things that I really respect the governor has brought to the table with from his experience in Homeland Security, his years of experience in that field, is we need to be prepared for anything. So do we have any plans right now that we can talk about? No, because they're very much in the conceptual state. We will also be leaning very heavily on the medical advice, the scientific advice. So, as it looks now, the curves show that, in a few months we will be out of this. Here's what we haven't talked about yet too much, and that's is this going to follow what we call the flu season? Is it going to be something similar that until vaccines or whatever other more permanent solutions are found, will this be something that cycles? And will it impact schools if there is a cycle? So those are all considerations that we have to be planning for, working toward, and we're certainly doing that.
Maria Markham.
So the colleges are putting together contingency plans at this point. Several of our institutions have already announced that all of their summer courses will be online, so they don't plan to reinstate physical face-to-face courses for summer. I think that as the summer moves on, we'll be able to make better decisions about what to do in the fall. But this spring and the summer online instruction has definitely presented an opportunity for faculty to prepare for those movements online. And we'll be able to provide some professional development for those faculty who are not as well versed in distance learning to be prepared for a fall semester that may look much like the spring. So there are some contingency plans in place. We're being proactive with summer, and we'll see, when the curve begins to flatten as it falls off, if it would be a responsible thing to bring students back to campus.
Couple of minutes remaining, and the question goes to Stacy Smith. Dr. Smith, from parents, from grandparents, from every social medium there is. Okay, AMI, how do I best use it? I want to do the best I can for my grandson, for my daughter, for everyone. How can I best utilize these?
Well, parents have always been the first teacher for their child. Okay. And so how do they best utilize this? They need to go ahead and try to plan some structure within their day. Okay. Set aside time for education. Okay. Set aside time to work on schoolwork. Make sure kids are in routines right now. Make sure kids are getting up, they're getting dressed, putting your shoes on, doing your hair, brushing your teeth, all those things. But getting folks on a schedule, okay? Also, learning can be fun, and it should be fun. And we're hearing from people who are sitting at the kitchen table, and those frustrations and temper. I mean, I know teaching my own kids is harder than teaching my classroom of kids. But learning can be fun. Get out of the house, take a walk. If you're talking about shapes and geometric figures, walk around, look for them, identify them, put hands on things. It doesn't have to be at the kitchen table, skill and drill. School districts have been encouraged to rethink types of assignments that are being asked of families to do. And so mom and dad, step back and look at this and say, as mom and dad, how can I do this with my child? Not as the classroom teacher, but as mom and dad, how can I do this? And if they are having issues or trouble with a concept or a skill that's being asked, that's where they need to reach out to the school and to the teacher, and they need to communicate that and say, I need more support with this lesson or this skill. It's not a comfort zone. But read with your kid. Read every day. Have your child read to you. That's probably, if I would say there's one thing, if you're going to make sure you did one thing, keep reading. Keep talking to your child. Keep having your child sit down and write. Keep a journal. That's important right now. And so learning hasn't stopped just because we're not in a brick and mortar building. And parents have always been the first teacher.
And with that, our time has simply expired. We hope we have been able to impart something anyway to our audience. And if we were able to, it is strictly because of Dr. Smith, Secretary Key, and Dr. Markham. Thank you, the three of you, very, very much for being part of our special edition of Arkansas Week. As always, we thank the audience for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.